than we are.
Good afternoon, and it's the Branchville Borough Historical Society quarterly presentation, and today we're talking about Church Hill, the historical high spot of Branchville. And you can see this is a woodcut from 1844, I believe. And he's smart, right? And and it's the center of Branchville, what Branchville looked like back then. This is Church Hill. This is the center of Branchville, which is the hubbub where everybody doesn't know when to stop and start and turn. They don't know how to drive in that. I had to point this out because Bill Bathgate was talking about it, and also Brad Henke has told me this in the past. This is a bridge. Right over here is where the bookstore is, for all intents and purposes. Might not be exact, but this is a bridge because this is a stream that runs down from Madison, and it's not always full of water, but there's enough that they had to put a bridge over in the middle of town. What?
That's the original Culver's Brook.
That's the original Culver Brook?
Yeah, it moved. There was a dam that broke, I think in 34 or something, but before a dam broke, but the original, that's where the original Culver's Brook was, and it went down through there. And then when the dam broke,
And you said in 34, you mean 1834?
Yeah, oh yeah. It might have been before then.
Yeah, because...
One of the dams, there were so many dams on that stream, upstream.
And where did this come from? I mean, where did this, now we're getting off another topic.
Okay, it didn't go, you know how Culver's Brook goes now?
Yeah, it's back here.
Right, it used to go across there.
Up here.
And actually, right where your pointer is now, was the original Beamer Mill.
The Beamer Mill. See, this is the stuff that's going to never get onto that plaque in the front yard, but...
not Christman.
Not the Crispins.
The Beamer Mill, that was supposedly back in the 1790s.
So that's where milling started in
It's a
Branchville.
little bit further down that stream, but
This way?
But
This
that
way?
was the original Culver's Brook. It used to run down through there. And
Wow.
I understand that it moved when...
All right, I can't even wrap my head around that. Bill?
As far as my understanding, Culver Brook was named Culver Brook because it came down from Culver's Lake.
Right.
And like I told you before, I can remember when the pipe broke for that stream coming across there, that Russ Bellis Jr., not his son, Russ
Right.
Bellis, who lives across the street, worked on it when they backfilled a broken pipe.
Yeah.
And it was then, and that still goes underground and comes out on the left-hand side of the bridge going up, was it Price Street?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It could have run into the brook. I found an article in a museum about that.
Okay, well, we'll have to look into that. I'm gonna stop this conversation. I should never have talked about the bridge. Quit it, everybody, quit it. So, anyway, the important part about this is that the Church Hill was the main thoroughfare out of town. It went up there and out and around that way. There was this little road here, but that kind of just went, I think that hooked up to a road to Culver Lake. But there's no such thing as 206. So that's what that was.
When that road goes to the left, that's the Union Turnpike.
This is the Union Turnpike, okay. And then, yes, and then it goes up towards, Bridge Road, what is that? Long Bridge Road, it connects up in there and comes out. That winds around all in there. So that's where that goes. All right. These are the highlights of my talk. We're going to talk about the academy. We're going to talk about the tower. We're going to talk about the church and the cemetery. Sheila, can you go back to the first slide? Because I should have said this. This is the academy, and this is the meeting house, the church on Church Hill. All right? That's how that goes. So that's the schoolhouse, and that's the church house. Meeting house, really. Okay, thanks, Pete. Now, the road. I've already talked a little bit about it. But it's a very old section of Branchville, one of the earliest sections of Branchville to be built up. and it was part of the Bass Farm, which I did not look at all. I have no idea. I'll tell you what, I couldn't really find deeds for this meeting house. There's no deeds on that property, which is fascinating, but this is who owned the area. Job Kosad, or depending on which piece of paper or which generation, those are the other spellings of the name. Kozart, Koza, and he bought that land, and then the Ellett family also owned land in the area. Allot was the name that gets used mostly in this presentation, but it changes to those others, and eventually Elliott, which is what the name of the cemetery is under now. It's called the Elliott's Cemetery, no apostrophe, Elliott's Cemetery. So, and it's tax exempt. And it's just because of the mistakes made in recording, and people change their names and they decide how they want it to be, and that's what happens. This I found fascinating. I told my brother this morning, he's like, really? Because Branchville was just a section of Frankfort Township, it didn't have any real standing, it was also referred to as Church Hill. It was not Branchville, not until 1821. So in the earlier times, it was called Church Hill because there was a hill with a church on it. And so they called the whole area Church Hill, because that was the most outstanding feature. It was a high spot in the town. And then, as I said, it was originally the main east-west road, and Church Hill had a variety of names. In 1869, it was considered a continuation of Main Street, which was really Mill Street, 519 to that road to Newton. We call that Mill Street now. Comes up through Branchville, goes into the middle of town, into that mess of stop signs, and then becomes Main Street up there currently, and it goes out onto 206 currently. So, but back in the day, when I say 1869, it was Main Street came up, it was what we think of as Mill Street now, that was Main Street, and went up Church Hill, and that was Main Street. And then when the town incorporated and the town council got together, they named the roads officially, and that's Church Hill was called High Street, because it was the highest, it went up to the highest point. So it's been messed with a little bit, but it's okay. This is a Sanborn fire map with all the properties, and Brad could tell you all about it, but I'm not going to let him tell you about this now. But it just shows you in 1920 that there was no Roslyn Road. Like Roslyn Road, where are you? Would be up here, all right? And 206 would be here. But this is that, what we call Main Street now, that goes up to the Union Turnpike, and I already forgot the bridge road, what's it called? Long Bridge, thank you. Long Bridge Road winds up to Culver Lake. This is Church Hill that goes due west, out to whatever was out there that they wanted to get to, farms and such. And I just think it's important to realize that the structure of the town was so different then. That's in 1920. That's not even that long ago, only 100 years compared to what we're talking about. And right here, maybe there, right there, that's the academy. And the church would have been, I think, up here. I don't know, what do you think?
Up a little further. Up.
Further?
Yeah, because that road goes all the way out to Roslyn.
There is no Roslyn.
Yeah, well, it runs off the map. There was no Roslyn.
Right.
Roslyn Road was not built that long ago. That was just a path.
Right, that's why I think that Roslyn Road would have been up through here.
No, it was all the way out. See that last house there?
Yeah, that one?
Yeah, that's the next to the last house on.
That still exists?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna believe them. I'm believing them. That's a lot of houses to get all the way to that Roslyn Road. So we're.
You see that if you go down just a little bit.
Or?
That's where the Lewis house was I don't know if it's related to you, I think it is, right? It's a Lewis, and then the next house is where Dave and Liz Yaden
That's the
lived.
Yaden house?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then those.
And then there's no houses from there all the way to here?
There wasn't back then, no.
Okay.
And then
Then those are the older houses.
those,
All right. So somewhere up in here is where we're talking about then, but there's no
Yeah.
structures in
No,
1920.
no.
Okay. Gotcha. Thanks. I really do mean that.
You told me to.
I did. I told him before we started, you tell me what I say is wrong, and he is doing it, and I appreciate that. You guys should appreciate it. Okay. The Academy. This is that woodcut again. The Academy was a private school in 1844. The legislation to fund public education didn't happen until 71. That's when they built the first rendition or addition or iteration of the big school that we're sitting in right now. But this isn't the original one. But once this school got built, that academy went out of business. They didn't have people there running the school. It still stands on, and Samuel Bishop, the guy who actually named us Branchville, he was one of the early teachers at if not the first, at the academy. And the academy, you had to pay to go there, so it was for the rich kids in town and in the area. The people who had big farms, they could go to school. The people who had no farms, they couldn't go to school. And it still stands on Church Hill, and it's been a private residence. And in the 1970s, we had a borough architect, John Dodd. He seems to be pretty well known. And we even have a rendition that he drew that's in the museum of the middle of town, which is pretty cool. He did the renovation of the academy for the homeowners at the time and restored the bell tower, the cupola. So, got a couple of pictures of the current. Beep. Did you like my pink drawing on that, though? Really? It was good, huh? All right. This is the first one that says on Church Hill. That's from the Church Hill side of things. I sneak around when nobody's home and take pictures, and I always expect the police to show up, but they never do. And then when I took the one from Main Street, one of our new guys that works for the town, Cody, he came up behind me. I thought he was going to arrest me. He goes, "Oh, no, I just don't want to photobomb whatever you're doing." So it was good. He was picking up garbage along Main Street. I just love this town. I just love it. Anyway, there's the bell tower, cupola, right up here. This is the back porch. That gives you a full story at the bottom, the basement, and then the front yard. You walk right into the first level. You can see the very old foundation is still there, and it really does look like a schoolhouse. The siding here, this is just one level, and I'm sure they put up they added rooms upstairs, but at this point, when it was first a school, it's just a big old schoolhouse. Now, this is a picture of a plane spotting tower from, I think, West Milford. I got it online. It's not Bill Bathgate. It's not Bill Bathgate's dad. It's somebody from West Milford climbing up in the spotting tower. So what happened in World War II, when we got nervous that there was going to be enemy aircraft flying over and bombing us, plane spotting became a thing, and Bill said that when he was in school, they taught the kids to memorize the outline silhouettes of friendly and non-friendly aircraft. And then and they had charts in the tower itself. Ellen told me that her mother, Ginny Berry, as a teenager, she and her girlfriends had to man the tower in Lafayette, and they had charts. They had to write down what time they saw a plane and where it was headed. Then I talked to, I'm going to get ahead of myself. Anyway, the spotters were volunteers, and they had to take care of our towns. And the towers were built at the highest points with the widest horizons. Okay, so where ours was, we're going to talk about.
In 1942, my mother and father served as a volunteer.
In 1942, Jerry Orr's mom and dad served as volunteers in our tower. Anybody have pictures of that tower? Did you know it? Well, think about it. And you, who may see this later online, if you have pictures of that tower, Let us see them. Thanks. Yeah, they had to be out in a field. Beep. Now, this is where another place I thought I might get arrested. I snuck through the back of the cemetery and got into the back of what I call the Fletcher's house. John and Natalie Fletcher's. This is their backyard, and that's their house up there. They're not with us any longer, but that's the house. But it appears to me there was a break in the wall back in the, I'll show you a picture of it in a minute, but there's a rock wall that backs the cemetery, and they had to break a break in the wall to get through to this field to where they could put this tower. Now this was just a big old farm field. There was nothing, no buildings up here. And Dave Bathgate, I talked to him yesterday, and he said that he remembered going up in that tower maybe at age 14 or so during the Korean War with a friend of his who was maybe a little older and had joined the Civil Defense League. And they went up there, and there's a phone. He said there was a telephone hooked up, and if they saw something, they had to call up and report on the phone what they saw, which direction, what time, all that jazz. So it's pretty impressive. We were pretty good. Beep. That's the break in the back of the cemetery wall. There's some kind of fence up there with a gate, but that had nothing to do with the tower. But that's as I said, whoever did this wall, there are parts of the wall that are knocked down, but this part was very neatly opened up to the back. They capped the end of the stone wall. I thought that was interesting. Beep. Now, I call this the star of the show because without the church, we'd have no Church Hill. So, this is originally built as the Puritan Meeting House. I learned a smidge about Puritans. Then it became known as the Union Church and finally as the Free Church. And it was built up there. Take notice, I think I'm going to have it on one of my slides, but Joe Cadella explained to me early on that this is sitting kind of facing up the hill. It's not facing straight onto the roadway. You can see that, right? That's the back of the meeting house, and that's the front of the meeting house. It kind of faces the front door, faces up the hill a little bit. I wanted to point that out. Okay, beep. So it's estimated the mid-1700s. Everything kept saying maybe it was 1750, but that's when it was estimated to have been built. The meeting houses were built for the Puritans, but they were built on private property. Like a Puritan guy would build the house on his property. And it wasn't owned, it was owned by him. And I can say him and guy because it was in the 1700s and we weren't allowed to own anything, girls. But the house was built as a meeting house. It was very minimalistic, just wooden structure on some stones, and there had the word is sashes. The windows did not have a sash, which meant they did not open. So there was glass panes, but you couldn't open them. But the light could come in, but no cool air. And the pews that you sat on were just planks across logs. It was not very comfy. Joe painted the picture of some poor kid sitting there in his woolen outfit for Puritan meeting time, which went on for hours and hours, sitting on a hard bench. And that's why the Puritans left, because nobody could take it that long, so they had to get out. They had to quit the religion. It was too tough. The Puritan meeting house also collected taxes per seat. So when you went in, I don't know how they did it. I don't know if you paid for the month or you paid every time you went in, but you had to pay to sit in your seat or on that bench in the Puritan meeting house. And it was an income then for the guy who owned the building. So he made money off of the meetings. And I guess they let other people meet in them as well. But that was part of what they did. There was a Presbyterian pastor, Reverend William H. Belden, and he wrote about this church, the Puritan church, the meeting house. No, I'm sorry. He wrote about this building as the church, that its walls echoed with the doctrines of almost every known sect, including Mormonism, I don't know why he singled that one out, but whoa, the Mormons were here too. Everybody was here. So he was just commenting on the fact that it was well used by so many different organizations and religions. The land eventually was then purchased by Job Kosad in the late 1700s, and of the land that he purchased, he gave 17 acres on the hill, including the building that was now becoming known as the Union Church. He gave it to his daughter Hannah for her dowry. She married this guy, John Ellett, and now that was theirs to charge money for if they wanted to. That's where they lived. The thing about this charging of the fees, it's speculated, however, that they didn't charge. They could have, but they didn't, and which is why it probably became known as the free church, because you could go meet up there with your congregation and not have to pay, which I think is lovely. The Presbyterians, of which I am one, used the free church from their origin in 1820 until Colonel Gustin in Augusta built the Presbyterian Church of Frankfurt in 1827. Then the Presbyterians left the free church. This is, as an aside, not having anything to do with Church Hill, but the big church that is the Presbyterian Church, they moved into that in 1857. In general, all the other, like the Methodists built their own church in town, so the people that had church congregations started to build their own buildings, and this building itself ended its usefulness, and just nothing bad happened, it just nobody was using it, and it kind of fell a little bit to ruins. Reverend Bonney from the Presbyterians, he had histories of the area too. In 1870, Bonney recorded that the building was still there. It was still there, but it had been updated over its time, because that's probably at that point it's 120 years old, right? I can do that math today, and it had been updated a little bit, but it hadn't been used for a long time, so there was nothing there. And then this guy Albert Ellett shows up. He's a descendant. Somehow, I didn't trace that, but somehow he's related to the guy that had that building. And he said, well, that's my building. My family owned this land. I'm taking that building. So he dismantled the building, took the boards and the nails, and dragged them over to the Delaware River where he had a farm, and he built a nice house with it. So and he lived to be 99. Somewhere is his death year, but I don't know when that is. All right, that's all I had to say on the meeting house. Now we're at the cemetery. This is the entrance to the Church Hill Cemetery in 2025. Nobody was going to arrest me here. They didn't care I was wandering around the cemetery. Beep. I got hold of a survey, and I marked out in green, this is the cemetery lot. This is the lot where Corey and Roberta Loyola live right now in the yellow house. This survey was done to build that yellow house. I have marked the spot just randomly, so if I'm wrong, you can yell and say, no, move it over. But I marked the spot for the tower, the plane spotting tower, and possibly where the meeting house is built, facing up the hill a little bit. What do you think? Possible? Anybody? You'll go with it? All right. Just to give you an idea of where that was. Okay, beep. Now a little bit about the cemetery. In general, in the good old days, you had a lot of land, and when somebody died in your family, you had your family plot on your farm, and you buried them on your family plot on your farm. But as Branchville got a little bit more of a borough, it wasn't a borough yet, as it got to be more of a town center, the lots were small. There wasn't room to put your dead people in the backyard, and so we needed a burial ground. Burial grounds were generally not part of our world until the middle to, I think it was like 1860, where you got permission to establish a free, open cemetery, which is why the Branchville Cemetery over by Frankfurt School got started then. But churchyards became cemeteries. We all know that those are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. So churchyards were. So this cemetery was established next to the meeting house, which is kind of a churchyard. And it was when the Elliots were there. And it turns out that John Elliott owned that land that the churchyard is in, or that the cemetery is in. Not the meeting house part of it. I don't know. But anyway, I don't know where the lines are drawn. I told you there's no deeds. But John Elliott owned that land. So when he married Hannah, they combined their land and they had all this space. And that is how he got all that extra land. And then what happened is that there were a lot of family members following that with marriages. And those are the names that you can see. Elliott's, the Ryersons, and Corson family. And there's no, as I said, there's no deed to this exact piece of property. So it's a little bit of a mystery, but I don't think it matters. I think it's of interest. So beep. Now this is what I think, honestly, and I'm making this up. Honestly, I think what happened was the cemetery started because the first person buried in it is Hannah Elliott. She was Hannah Cosad. She marries John Elliott. She dies at a very young age, I think it is, 35. And now he's got to bury her. So she becomes the first burial in that cemetery, which is, I mean, why wouldn't you do that? You own the property. It was a meeting house. I think he started the cemetery for his wife, which is very sweet. Her inscription on a stone that is no longer there is, "A good wife, kind mother, and obedient child." 2 years later, her mom dies at age 82, and her stone is still there. And I mean, it's still there even today. This is a great picture of it that Joe had. And the inscription is, "Look on me, and you may see as I am now, so you must be." And the last known burial that I had information about is of Jacob Allen Corson, who died in 1916. So there were 103 years of people being buried in that. So you got to figure, honestly, there's probably a lot of bodies in there. Just because there aren't markers or records of them, there's a lot of souls living in that ground. So, which is important. We got to think about that. So, some other interesting tales. Bill called me up the other night and goes, "Deb, check out page 19 in the Unforgotten Man." So I did, and that was the homicide. Now, you can read it up there. I'm going to tell you what my version of it is. That this George Lloyd, the Reverend George Lloyd, he would write things on scraps of paper all over the place. He kept notes. He was the Presbyterian minister. They got attempted assassin during the Civil War. Anyway, he writes about the fact that in this time, what did I put up there? About 1858, around thereabouts. He said a few days ago, the skeleton was found up there in Church Hill. He doesn't say it's in the cemetery. He says it's in Church Hill, and that it has been determined since that it was probably this young woman who disappeared 40 or 50 years ago, and they think that maybe she was pregnant at the time, and so for whatever reason that somebody thought that she should die, I don't know, but it was figured to be a homicide, but of course, and that's nothing anybody's ever going to look into, and didn't at that time. So that's the homicide story of Church Hill. Caskets crunched. This is kind of weird too. It's a story told, I think it came from Ann Turner, bless her soul, that during the World War II, when they were putting that road into the cemetery to get the plane tower in, that the trucks that rode over the ground to do that could hear the caskets crunch under the ground as their heavy trucks went through, which is kind of horrible, yuck. But then there's a couple, I read 2 different renditions of the same story, so I'm going with it. And then my favorite one is Emma Wood. Now, Emma Wood was the wife of Tracy Wood, the guy who ran Wood Funeral Home. And I don't know when she lived and died. Jerry, do you have any idea?
Well, they bought the house in 46 when they moved into where we're living,
Mm-hmm.
and she probably died, about 10 years later.
Later. So this,
And then Tracy bought the house next door, tore it down, and built the house because she had died, and
he wanted a
sold
smaller
it to his
place.
daughter.
Yeah, yeah. So it's after the World War II time. That's what I couldn't figure out. And thank you for that. So they lived in that house in 46, and the World War II tower had been already put up. So just to give a perspective, after the World War II tower thing had happened, then somehow there were workers that showed up. I don't know who hired them and why they were there, but they were supposed to dig a drainage ditch and build a regular road through there somehow. It's already been started apparently. Joe, you were talking to me about the road that swoops up into the wall. And she said, "No way, Jose." So she stood in front of the machinery. She said, "You're not driving in here. I own this place, and I didn't give permission, so you cannot come in here and do this work." And the guy said, "All right," and they left. Like they probably went to lunch. But she just wouldn't let it go. And she didn't own it. She did not own it, but she talked them into the fact that she did. And she is a course through marriages and whatever. And she really, I think this might be Lou Odell's words, although he did put it in quotes, that she saved it for the real owners, those buried there. So I just think that's really sweet. So that's a cemetery tale. Beep. A couple of rough things are going on up there. I don't even know when this would happen. In the last half of the last century, stones got pilfered. And to be fair, when you see an old graveyard and they have stones just sticking up out of the ground, they look like rocks that somehow got pushed up. But they were markers for graves that people didn't have money to have a regular headstone engraved and set in place. So there were stones that were removed from the cemetery, and people used them to line their sidewalks and do whatever building they needed around, because there's just a field up there. Who knew? They didn't know, because they didn't have us to tell them. So they just took stuff. And when I was up there, I said to Joe, I saw this big flat white stone with squared off edges. He goes, "Yeah, that's a headstone." I'm like, oh man. So there's a lot of stuff up there that still needs to be saved. And there are damaged stones that are broken. And Joe, whose stone is this, do you think?
That's
told me.
John Ellett, it's the one over here. It's actually two stones. The one in the upper left-hand corner is a
This?
piece of another, but all the rest of it.
That looks like it says Job, J-O-B.
Yeah,
It does.
Right.
And that says John
that's
Ellett?
John Ellett.
Okay.
Yeah, what's left of it anyway.
Yeah. So there are these really, I want to say, important historical markers in there that need tending to. We have to see what we can figure out. Beep. Yay, Jerry Orr's on the picture. There's Jerry. Jerry Orr in costume explaining to visiting Girl Scouts the historical significance of the old Churchill Cemetery on May 15th, 1971. In 71, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the naming of Branchville, and there was a lot of things happened in town. It was really excellent fun and interesting. And under the guidance of Jerry and Charles Fountain, they got help. Some of it was kids that were involved. I'm not sure how it all worked, but Jerry could tell us. And they cleaned up as much of that cemetery as they could manage. And they made this fence around the standing stones. Now, Jerry, were those stones there and you fenced them off, or did you move them there?
No, they were there.
They were there. Okay. Notice the condition of that fence. It's pretty good. It's a clean, white, brand new white picket fence attached to wire wrapped around the post. Really in nice shape. It's still up there and it looks pretty rotten right now. So that's another thing we want to do, is try to put a better fence up around the stones. And it doesn't seem to cover as much land right now as that picture depicts. So, okay, beep. Yeah, this is those stones in that fence today. the town went in, I think this might be coming up, but the town went in and cut down the ash trees because the ash trees are dying and falling, and it'd be terrible if they like smashed into things and broke things. But in doing so, they kind of left a lot of wood chips and a lot of junk laying around that needs to be dealt with. So we'll look at that too. But that's the mom's, Hannah Kosid, the mom. That's her headstone right there. And I don't know who that little one is. Anybody? Okay. This I love. These stones are there. This is one stone, two different shots of it. That's the dedication stone from the sesquicentennial, and it gets decorated at Christmas, and it's just a nice reminder that in 1971 we commemorated the cemetery's existence. So I like that. Beep. Now I give you a little view of the overall part of this. This is the back wall. And these giant ash logs are just laying back. There's a lot of it. There's no way just people could go in and pick those up and move them. They're big. They're big. So that's something that we had to figure out a way to manage. And then this is the front corner. This is Churchill, the road. And this is the front corner of the lot. You can see the trees have been cut down here. This kind of yellow line right here, that's about a foot deep of wood chips, because when they cut the trees, they just chipped it. And I can understand. Again, people don't know what's there, even if they were told. They're like, yeah, this is a good place to put our wood chips. So it's difficult, but that's where we are. Beep. Is there another slide? Okay, good. And this is the plea. Should we get together and have a Churchill Cemetery Commission? This is another part of the back wall that's not in as good a shape. This is more knocked down, going down the hill more. So it really, we want to try and figure out a way that we can commemorate and improve and restore and protect this really important part of Branchville history. So think about it. I don't have a plan, but I have a desire with no plan, but we'll figure it out. What?
I mean, what happens if we do decide that we want to do something and because there's no deed or what happens?
I don't know. But if nobody owns it, first of all, and I keep saying this because I kind of always think the best, nobody's going to want to buy that property and dig up all those bodies and put a house in. Did you ever see the movie Poltergeist? Come on. It's not going to happen. So I don't think anybody's going to want to claim that land as theirs for financial purposes. And I think if the town kind of has it. They're the ones that pay to maintain it. They don't have a deed for it, but nobody else does. And I don't think the town's going to dig it up and deal with all the skeletons and crunched up caskets. So I think in a normal world, I think we should be okay if we get permission from the town, and they don't want to get sued because somebody falls over or gets poison ivy or ticks or something. But it's to be dealt with. But
in 71, I don't remember us getting permission.
Yeah, no.
And it was really wooded and what have you, and the front was a mess.
Yeah.
And we trimmed it all out, and they brought new sod and seeded the whole front. And
Who paid for that?
We had a rainstorm 3 days before, and I said to Evelyn, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, went up there, and the sod had all come down into the hill. And I called the people right away in the morning, and we put the sod all back up. It was a mess.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
How high was the wall when it was intact? Does anybody know? Is there any historical pictures of how high the wall was?
How high was the stone wall in the back?
I imagine there was never a wall. They just threw the stones.
Oh, you mean as
Because
it is?
that, if you know,
Okay.
you probably saw that's my backyard.
Yes.
The stone wall goes right across my backyard. That's sort of that.
So when I was in there, you would call the cops on me, not the people that don't live in the Fletcher's
I almost
house?
shot you.
So you think of it more of as a stone row that just,
yeah,
that,
a
as the
lot of times
farmers
they don't-
would
they don't
around
take
here.
time to-
Right, they
Those
didn't build it.
rocks were just-
But that one section
Yeah,
is
when they
very
probably-
nicely,
They probably straightened it up when
yeah,
they cut the stones away.
to,
They took the
to,
stones
yeah.
that were in the middle and stacked them.
Yeah,
next
that,
to it.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
This would be a great tour that we could have of the stone wall of the cemetery if we get it cleaned up. Just have to walk along the stone wall of the cemetery. So as long as you warn Brad ahead of time and he doesn't shoot you. That's good.
Oh, Larry.
Anybody else have any comments about this?
Well,
Bill?
You're listing up there the 1821, 1971.
Yes.
I think Jerry Orr would probably back me up on this a little bit, that Lou Odell, who was an employee of Selected Risk, he was always putting out these journals, and he did extensive research. I think you'd agree, Jerry.
oh, yeah.
And if you ever run across these, they're getting few and far in between to find. They are a collector's item now, but they give you a pretty good, accurate history of Branchville. It doesn't give it all.
It's amazing.
And, I mean, we didn't have people going on the computers and looking all that back in the day.
No, he had to
But
go
Lou-
into the
Lou-
records halls.
You actually spent the time going like you do, all records here all over the place. So I just want to give him credit, because if it wasn't for Lou, and I think Jerry will agree, that
We
much
would
of
know
the
nothing if it
history
weren't for
would've
Lou.
went right down the
Yeah.
drain, yeah.
It would be, without him, I put him last on my list instead of first on my list, because I wanted to, I'm glad you brought all of that up.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, Lori Locks has scanned and made copies of that booklet, because there are so few of them. We have an electronic copy and some copies that have been run off, and they are fascinating. They're so filled with information of the history of Branchville.
And let me
Jerry.
say, he really worked on both those projects, the sesquicentennial and the bicentennial. And he suffered a brain tumor just during the bicentennial, and he was writing the book. And so he said to me, he says, "You come up, and I have started, and I want you to look at it." Oh, he gave it to me, and I read it over, and oh my God, there were so many errors.
Which you know he wouldn't have made if he didn't
I
have,
was shocked,
if he wasn't sick.
and I said to Evelyn, "I've got to do something." So I went up to see him the next night. I said, "Lou, there's information here that is not quite correct. I want you to drive around town and take a look and compare what you have written." And he called me the next day. He said, "I did, Jerry, and I threw it all out. I'm starting over."
Boy.
But they came to Branchville. He worked at Selected Risks, and they looked at that house, and it was in such bad shape. They went back to Long Island and thought that he actually told Selected he wasn't gonna come to work. And so Mrs. Odell said to him, "You know, that house needs us to get it fixed up. You call up and see if the job is ready." And they came and fixed the house up.
Wow, wow. And it's the house, which house is it?
Where,
Kilo Orr's house?
Kilo Orr.
Okay. That was the Odell house.
And
That house was a museum.
Yes,
before it
yes,
was
he had,
on-
everybody, his Victrolas, his movies,
Well,
his dioramas.
they had so many of the discs. He
Yeah.
had to enforce,
The Edison cylinders, yeah.
and he donated them to the Cornell University.
Oh, Cornell, okay.
$500,000 was rated.
Wow, wow. Yeah, he was something, yes. You just said Debbie.
I said Debbie.
Oh, yes.
Debbie, just to give you a little insight on the Odells, I'm sure we all know lots of stories, but when we were living in Branchville, our son Michael was born in Newton Hospital in 1978. And the Odells invited us to come have dinner at their house. First of all, we probably didn't eat till like 9, 10 o'clock, but that's beside the point because, but anyway, so my husband and I were like, this is really something special, but we have 2 young kids, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. What are we gonna do taking them to their house? Because it was a museum. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So we told the kids, we're going to Mr. and Mrs. Odell's for dinner, and you can each take 1 toy with you to play with. So my son took a little bit bigger than a matchbox of the space shuttle with him. And so he was playing with it on the floor, and Lou and Florence were just fascinated with this space shuttle. So they said, well, what kind of plane is that? And my husband, I think, Steve said, well, that's a space shuttle. The space shuttle, they said. Steve said, yes, it takes people up and then it brings them back down. And what did they say? They were just in
They had
awe.
no idea?
No idea.
Wow.
No idea.
Wow. That's,
We talk about that interaction with them so often with our son because it was,
that's so funny.
I am so glad we made it through that evening because I was just,
A few
Didn't
other,
destroy anything.
a few other things about the Odells. The Newton Hospital had a community call, and I was on for Mrs. Albers, Mrs. Compton, and the Odells. One night, I had 3 calls. I had 11 o'clock, a 2 o'clock, and a 4 o'clock. Evelyn says, thank God you don't have somebody else. And they were late bloomers, so he was, Hollywood would call him to get the music off a certain disc.
Wow.
And he would record it and send to him. Well, he would fall if it was on the limb, and I don't know how many times they went to the hospital. One night, they fell and hurt his head, so Blue Ridge took him in, and I was taking Mrs. Odell. And so we get to the Newton Avenue, and she says to me, I think I'm having a heart attack. And I said, Mrs. Odell, you're not, you're just overexcited. So I get to the hospital, and I just like, should I have her checked out? And she says, well, don't tell Brevy that I'm here.
Brevy.
So
Brevy.
stays in one room, and he's in another. I'm going back and forth. And finally, they push her down the hall, and he goes, isn't that Florence? And I go, yeah.
oh my God.
The stories are out of this world.
Of being neighbors with the Odells is a pretty good deal, right?
And actually, one time they lost the electric, and he came and lived down in our house for 3 or 4 days.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's great.
And-
Bill, you had your hand up.
Talking about their house right next door, Jerry would remember Minnie Vaness.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, lives in Troy's house, or lived in Troy's house. And it was about 1942 or 43. I don't know what Minnie Vaness's husband did. I don't remember. Maybe Jerry does. But she was around town. But you could go there, make arrangements, and I can remember my aunt and uncle, 2 cousins, my sister and I, and my parents. You'd make arrangements to go to Minnie's house for a chicken dinner, and and you go and you'd sit down. You had the mashed potatoes, you had the chicken, you had the vegetables, the gravy, you had the works. The adults paid $1, and it was 35 cents for the kids.
Good deal.
And
Yeah.
she did all the baking for Johnny's and Jerry's.
She was the cinnamon roll lady?
Pardon?
Was she the cinnamon roll person?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And she also did hemming, the pants for Sam.
Okay, yeah.
So I would take it there, and of course, I'd always get a piece of pie or a cinnamon roll.
You said, I'll do it, Mr. Silverman, I'll do it.
And just another, on the corner, was my great uncle, Charlie Van Gordon. And he and Tracy Wood and Mary Everett, who lived in the oldest house in town, and Frank Roy, every Saturday in the late 40s, I would take asparagus, 4 pounds of asparagus for 60 cents to each one of them.
Wow, wow. You grew it
My grandmother did.
on the, where George's Wine is
Yeah.
now? Wow. Wow, it's amazing. Bill?
Another thing I remember about Minnie, Jerry brought it up, that she used to cook for Jerry Van Gordon at the Branchville Luncheonette. And you could see her shadow in the back there on the wall. And she was a smoker, and she would have the ashes hanging out on the end of the cigarette. Whatever she was mixing, it would fall in, she'd just keep right Yeah. I don't know what was in her chicken, but I knew what
It
was
sure
in it.
tasted good.
Yeah.
Sound like another cook we knew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
At another place.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, thank you very much for everything, for coming and sharing